There's tons of books to read. There's tons of ways to learn the information of leadership. Just like you can read a book on how to fly an airplane doesn't mean you know how to fly an airplane. So you really have to cultivate leadership, and that's what our brand is really trying to signify.
Welcome aboard the 21.5 Professional Pilots Podcast.
Rock on. You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
It's a show by professional pilots for professional pilots.
I looked back at them and I said, I don't think we're at the right airport. And they go, I don't think we are either.
Each episode, we bring you fascinating conversations with industry experts.
I think I should be a go-to on how to deal with 63, 64-year-old men.
You're going to chase it like a dog chasing a school bus.
But we're not just about the serious stuff. We're here to have fun.
And I like to sit with pilots a lot of times. I always say they're better looking than Tom Cruise.
It's a whole thing.
The 21.5 Professional Pilots Podcast is your destination for everything aviation, whether you're cruising in the flight levels or just starting your journey. Max, I'm so excited for this episode. A big topic we've been talking about lately is leadership. We've had discussions with MBAA. We've had discussions with Dr. Chris Broyhill. And especially in business aviation, it is one of the hot topics where we can identify, look, leadership is an issue, but how do we actually teach leaders? How do we foster the next generation of leaders? And I'm excited that we've identified our guests today to help us. Gentlemen from First Class Leaders, President Kyle Freiberger, and Director of Training and Strategy, Mike. You're going to have to do this.
Sferrazza. Right. And the Director of Training and Strategy, Mike Sferrazza. Welcome to the show, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. It's all good. Keep that in. We're all humans.
Yeah, that's right. No kidding. It's the toughest part of the job. Well, fellas, appreciate your time, and we're excited to learn a little bit about leadership from you. Tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and how did you start First Class Leaders?
Sure. I'll start us off. It goes back, honestly, to my days as a kid, growing up in a shop with a father who I always call him the man with the stick. He meant well, but he was a very difficult father with discipline and stuff like that. And I saw that as like my leadership role, like this man who you got to do what he says or you're going to get in trouble. And I didn't know how to respond as a kid. So there was always a lot of fear, a lot of trying to hide it, trying to be perfect, trying not to get in trouble. And then I got into aviation. I was pretty young when I got into aviation, and I kind of got away from home, quote unquote, started to fly airplanes and thought I was getting away from kind of that difficult childhood. And over the course, I became an Air Canada pilot, Air Canada captain, did really well technically, yet I struggled with the people side. And it all kind of came back when I tied it all together and I started learning about myself, learning about my childhood, learning about my definition of leadership. I started really tying it back to this idea that I thought if I got away from home, then life would be easier. There'd be less frustrations, less difficulties, less challenges. Little did I know, there's just as many challenges in aviation, difficult personalities that you have to deal with, conflicts that you have to deal with. And so I realized it wasn't my dad issue. It was a human issue. It was a human challenge. So I was about 28 years old, and it was kind of at the last wits in a relationship. And that was the moment I'm like, there's got to be a better way. And that changed everything for me. So I went on this personal development journey and started looking at my role in aviation, my role as just a human being in general. And that led me down a path of learning about leadership, learning about emotional intelligence, stuff like this. And I realized nobody at any point in my career or just in my life in general had helped me with any of this. And I just said to myself, I said, if I didn't get the help and aviation hasn't taught me any of this, then maybe other people would like help with it as well. And started First Class Leaders.
So what is First Class Leaders? It's a leadership training company specifically for pilots and what, managers in aviation or what?
Yeah, so our niche right now, we target pilots. We focus on pilots, hoping to branch outwards. We look at leadership as our ability to influence and impact people. So ultimately, we just help people take the lead. So take the lead in the sense of constantly looking at how are we influencing the environment of the people around us. It's something that any human can do. We do look at it through the lens of aviation for several different reasons. Uh, we've helped people inside aviation mostly, but we also help other people as well. Anybody who's looking to, build their influence, figure out how to impact people and environments around them better. And we do that through, I'm really not a big fan of the word training because I think leadership training fails in aviation because you can't train it like technical skills. So we cultivate it. Leadership is a cultivation. There's tons of books to read. There's tons of ways to learn the information of leadership. Just like you can read a book on how to fly an airplane, doesn't mean you know how to fly an airplane. So you really have to cultivate leadership, and that's what our brand is really trying to signify.
Interesting. So one of the biggest failures in leadership, I think that we've talked about before previously on the show, is where somebody ends up being the department manager of a flight department, or even just the lead pilot in a two pilot operation, right? Kind of by default, like the other guy quit or retires, and all of a sudden you're like, oh well, you've been here long enough. Here you go. Now you're in charge. Go for it. And we've seen just, anecdotally through over the years, some people that step up and do well. And, kind of like some leaders are born, I guess. And then we see other ones that don't do so well and have a really hard time being a good leader and, start to lose respect of some of their colleagues and things like that. So what do you guys do to address like a situation like that where somebody's coming up short?
I think one of the interesting things about this that I'd like to know for starters is that so many of us look at leadership as something that is determined by rank or by role, and here we look at leadership is not defined by what role you hold in the flight deck. Of course, there's the role of authority and who has the authority to make decisions based on given circumstances, but by no means is somebody that's in a first officer position unable to be a leader. So I think that when we look at crews that potentially have some conflict, or we look at lead pilots that um, use their authority as a way to call themselves a leader, something we focus on a lot. And it's something that we're seeing more often than not, especially as we notice age gaps in leaders, the way that things are today with how people discuss their feelings, their emotions, whereas, there's a bit of a changing of the tide here too. So it's something we focus on a lot. I'll let Kyle speak to some of the methods too.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, leaders are not born. There's no such thing in our world, like our belief, and I'm only speaking to what we believe and what we are pushing out into the world, and I can speak to how it's working and why it's being effective. It's just kind of like what Mike's talking about. Like we hear this, we might, maybe people listening to this have heard this before. Leadership's not a title or rank, but then it's like, yeah, but when I'm an FO and like captain, super senior, like I can't do anything about it. That's actually where leadership is more important, right? I'll give you an example. People or companies are sending me pilots when they hear I have leadership training. They're reaching out to me and they're like, "Hey, I have this really challenging, difficult pilot. I need to send them into your leadership training." Right? And I used to be like, "Yeah, yeah, bring them in." Like taking everybody, helping everybody, and in all fairness, our workshops, we host workshops, we host interactive sessions. They're actually really effective, even for the people who are challenging. But the question I started asking these decision makers, I said, well, who do you think leadership training is for? All right. Leadership training is for the person who's open to it, who has to deal with that difficult person and lead that difficult person. And that's why leadership is not a position or rank, because if you think of it that way, if you believe that and you wait to become a captain and you think, well, now I have the power, that's actually manipulation and control. You're actually waiting to have the authority because you figure the authority, somebody has to listen to me. That's not leadership. Leadership is not, if the moment somebody thinks they have to follow you, it's not leadership. It's manipulation. It's control. It's authority.
Mhm.
So leadership is thinking, okay, hey, how do I inspire somebody to want to follow me, to trust me, right? To buy in. And so even the student pilot who's dealing, they've got an instructor that's trying to teach them something, and that instructor just keeps saying it the same way over and over again, and the student's getting frustrated and being like, well, I just don't get it. Right. In that moment, the question becomes, how do I take the lead as a student? How do I help my instructor say, hey, do you mind sharing that or trying to explain that a different way? I'm just not getting it. So that's still there, right? Think about every aspect of your career. You show up to an interview, right? They don't want to hear canned answers. They want to hear authenticity. They want to hear somebody who actually understands what it means to take the lead. Right. And then you get into first officer. How many first officers come to me and they're like, Kyle, I didn't speak up. I'm beating myself up. Right. It's one of the most common things, one of the most normal things not to speak up. But yet in our whole aviation careers, we're told you got to speak up, you got to speak up, you got to speak up. That's not fixing the problem. Nobody speaks up because they're told. You speak up when you understand what psychological safety is. You speak up when you start to understand why we're not speaking up, truly. And so these first officers in those moments, those are leadership moments. And if they wait, right, and they think, oh, when I'm a captain, then it's going to be easier. Over and over and over again, they're disappointed because it's still the same underlying habits or beliefs that they have that are still causing these frustrations, these communication breakdowns, these conflicts.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you describe it that way, especially, the difference between airline pilots and business aviation pilots, where a lot of times business aviation pilots are flying with the same people all the time, whereas at the airlines we fly with different people all the time. And I feel like, especially as a first officer, the leadership portion of it is scalable, right? Depending on the situation. And I find like, if you're flying with somebody who's kind of weak as a captain in the leadership role, and it's comes on you to kind of step it up, and other times if you have you're paired up with somebody who is a strong leader and is good and is the captain too, then you can scale it back because you don't need as much influence in those situations. So it's kind of interesting to look at it from that perspective versus just like, hey, you're in charge, so be a good leader.
Well, the other thing too is the advantage I think of airline pilots because I think the systemic problem we really have is that leadership is not really taught right in the curriculum that we're going through as a pilot. And I think like what you mentioned, Kyle, is I think most pilots think, well, I'm the leader when I get to be the CFI or the captain or whatever. And so it's so rank focused that's when you start thinking about it. And even when I upgraded to captain at the airline, I remember there was like a 2 hour, like, now you're in charge class. I don't remember what they called it, but it was like, oh, okay, welcome, how to think like a captain. And what you're describing is something completely different. And it's something that there's a hole in the industry right now. And, so I love this idea of starting when you're a student pilot, because you're right. This can't be a 2 hour course when you've upgraded at a 121 carrier. So maybe talk a little bit about the program that you've developed and how you're helping people.
Well, we got a number of different offerings at this current moment. We have really brought people into a 1-day workshop, which we have spent time splitting the day into some sort of knowledge-based training for the first half of the day, and we really spend the second half of the afternoon breaking out into breakout sessions with one another and practicing. Like Kyle mentioned earlier on, we like to cultivate an environment to be a better leader, and we do that by practicing, by being vulnerable. So we found when people are or when people feel psychologically safe, and the definition of that is creating an environment where people feel like they can open up, they can talk about these things, they can be vulnerable. Um, they tend to see more solution to their stuff going on in their life. Um, Beyond that, we have just recently started some one-to-one coaching, and I'm going to let Kyle talk about the one-to-one stuff because it's
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. Like, so what Mike's saying on the workshop side is, I really wanted to we really wanted to build something that wasn't another CRM session where you're being force fed a bunch of information. Like, so there's a word that I like to use, it's clarity. And clarity to me is really about understanding the gap between what the company, what you know a good leader is. So the company says, right, any company I've ever worked for, I'm generalizing here, but company CRM says, be a good leader. CRM says, be humble. CRM says, be a good listener, be a good communicator, gives us the TENS model, gives us the Swiss cheese model, gives us all these things. Okay. So we have this ideal. We know what a good leader looks like. We know what good CRM looks like. Then it's about understanding, well, what do I currently do? What do I currently understand? What kind of leader am I? Like, how do I show up in when it's pressure, when the pressure's on? How do I show up when there's stress? How do I show up when the other person doesn't agree with me? And that gap between how I show up and how I know I'm supposed to show up is where most people get stuck because they don't know how. It's super difficult if you don't have clarity. Yet it's completely 100% common and normal in the sense that every single human being feels that. We react. We have this negative feedback loop where we perceive a threat, we react, we justify, we blame, right? And then we stagnate. And we want to break that loop. And so all of our training is geared towards helping somebody recognize that they're stuck in this loop, make it normal. So help people normalize it. So what I mean by that is every single person, our brains are literally wired for survival. So anytime we perceive anything as a threat, right, we go and we justify and we run from the line. And the challenge is we're perceiving psychological threats now, right? So typically we don't really have to fear for our physiological safety, but we do fear for our psychological safety. Am I good enough? Will I get fired? Is this person going to think differently of me? Are they not going to trust me? And what happens with that is we try to put on a show, a facade, right? We try to play this part of this role of this macho captain who has it all together, but it's just not true. There's no human in the world that has it all together. And we have to start addressing and looking at it from this position of, hey, we're all flawed. And the best version of us is going to be the version that accepts and admits our flaws. And then we take the lead. And what does it mean by take the lead? What we mean by it's like we have these 5 pillars we use. So we say, when we say take the lead, how do I take the lead? What we're doing is bringing back ownership to me. And the reason we came up with this ideology is because if we look at aviation, or if we look at the world in general, and you want to think of every coaching call that I've done, every client I've had, every person I've helped, we have the exact same threat. And the threat covers basically the human population. This is, again, my belief, this is my understanding. But the greatest threat to all of that, safety, uh, happiness, joy, success, everything, is blame. The moment you blame somebody, the moment you justify, you're giving away all your power. You have no control over it. And you're suggesting if somebody else or something else changes, my life gets better. But take the lead. When you ask yourself, how do I take the lead? The reason that's so powerful, it's a trigger, it's a shift, takes us from blaming or justifying and focusing on literally what we can't control to thinking, well, how do I take the lead in this moment? And what that does is it literally gives me the ability to possibly do something about it.
That's really powerful too, because especially in the airline world, there are so many things out of your control. And I think we've probably all flown with the captain or the other pilot that just constantly is blaming everything around them for, oh, this delay, the rampers aren't here, the fuel truck's late, what's ATC? And it's miserable. Yeah. If you're the other crew member, it's miserable because you're just sitting there and you're like, we can't control this. And you're wasting so much energy on stuff that's just out of our hands. And so that mindset shift, it's a simple one, but taking the lead. So that's really powerful, Kyle. That's step 1 in this process?
Yeah. So it's really the most important step would come before that. So we have to be aware enough to ask ourselves to take the lead. Mm-hmm. So some of the just kind of, so the process is figure out what triggers you, right? What you don't know, so anytime you're blaming, justifying any of those opportunities, those are opportunities to ask ourselves, how do I take the lead? Right? We can't control tons of different things, but we can control what we do and how we show up. And the whole idea is if we control, like, let's say, you know, shit's hitting the fan, right? We got an emergency and lights and bells and whistles are going off. Aviation says, hey, you got to show up composed. You got to be intentional. Don't react. Well, number one is everybody's going to react. There's like no avoiding that. The question now becomes is who's aware enough to recognize they've reacted and to shift back to being intentional. So that's the game that we're playing. We're trying to shift back to being intentional as quickly as possible. So once we are aware that we're reacting, we ask ourselves how to take the lead. And then what we do is we filter it through 5 guiding principles that help us to make decisions. So we can be curious, we can take ownership, we can be humble, we can be supportive, and we can be courageous. And so I could pick any one of those things that's going to help me, right? So maybe, lights and bells and whistles are all going off. Oh crap, there's an engine fire, right? I have that reaction. Okay, how do I take the lead? Okay, I need help. Hey, first officer, right? Get the checklist, right? It's almost like the start of good CRM. It's the trigger moment. It gets us back into the headspace of, I've heard it put like, take a big deep breath, right? Take a pause, just stop. But none of that stuff stuck with me. But these 3 words stuck with me. And so the more I use it in every aspect of my life and the more I filter these options through these 5 guiding principles, what I'm doing is no matter what's going on in the world around me, I'm still showing up the way that I want to. There's nothing worse than flying with, Mike and I. Mike says something and I get frustrated at him and then he gets frustrated at me and we just go around this loop. Versus I got to think to myself, so, okay, he says something. I could choose to be frustrated, right? I could justify why I'm frustrated. I could spend all my energy on that, or I could take the lead. And the moment I decide to take the lead, now I'm going to show up as somebody who's not frustrated. Because, like you said, how fun is it to be around that person who's blaming and justifying? It's not very fun. And so I can't fix that person that we're talking about, but I can learn to fix myself. That's the only person I can fix. And so we have this world of people who are taking the lead. This is my big, grandiose belief is we have this world of people taking the lead. What would aviation look like? Right? If people weren't blaming and justifying. If I went flying, I used to, fly through the airlines, and it's super common. 2 things. Saying things like, oh, you just need to be a chameleon. That's one. Number 2 is, oh, you don't want you got to bid to avoid that guy. So what's wrong? And what happens? Well, the company just says, yeah, you can just bid to avoid if you don't want to work with them. It's like, okay, well, I can't do that till after the flight. So what you're telling me is I get on a flight, I know I fly with the guys, so I just ignore them and then bid to avoid them. Like, it doesn't sound like a very good solution versus the more challenging the other pilot, the more opportunity there is for me to become a better leader. If you don't have that, you can't become a good leader. So it's those opportunities. So what happens if I go into the cockpit? I stop blaming and justifying the other person, but I get curious and I start to understand what their beliefs are. I start to understand why they think that way, right? And I start to open up and I learn how to open up that dialogue. I learn to lead and influence that person. That's a game changer. And I'm a better person because of it.
I remember, Max, you've flown with a couple people at your airline where people were like, oh, avoid this guy. And you took the attitude of like, you basically did like a podcast interview with these people and you tried to, understand, what are you doing? Why do you do things the way you do them? You know what I'm saying? I'm sure you can think of a couple of those, but I mean, that's basically the curiosity pillar that you're mentioning, Kyle.
Exactly.
And yeah, it really does take a mindset shift to do that. And I'm curious if you and Mike could maybe give us an example of what that looks like. Maybe if you guys are flying together and let's say Mike is maybe the captain that just won't take any input from the first officer. How would you, as the first officer, Kyle, like, how do you handle that? What does taking the lead look like in a scenario like that?
It's an interesting dichotomy. I think that's been the most impactful for Kyle and I because The cool thing about take the lead is that this isn't just applicable to the flight deck. It's applicable to your whole life. And so us as pilot colleagues, but also as friends, it's had a crazy effect on our life. So we use something called the DISC tool. Have you guys ever heard of this tool before? DISC?
I don't.
Okay.
No, I don't think so.
Generically, it's a personality assessment, and it kind of
Behavioral assessment.
pardon me, a behavioral assessment that puts you on a graph. It really does, and it shows you your behavioral tendencies. Okay, and Kyle and I are opposites on this graph, and so the first officer, the captain that you just explained, out of the two of us, Kyle would be that guy. Mike is the reserve guy that was shut down, takes things personally, and would just not speak up. A little bit more fearful. Even though I might have the knowledge, even though I might have, the grounds to say something, it's just I don't have what it takes deep inside of me. So one thing that Kyle and I have gotten really good at is taking ownership of how I can show up as the best version of myself in this moment. And then B, if I can impact how that person is receiving the way I'm trying to show up, we will ask. And we've worked through a number of impactful things together. Personal, we don't fly together, but so mostly personal. Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, it's mostly about so the greatest shift you can make for anybody listening, if you just want to start practicing leadership, stop focusing on your intention and start focusing on the impact that you have. So this is a tough one, and I mean, I'm still it will never end. It's a really difficult one, but things like one recent one that I just did was somebody, and I did this with Mike actually recently. I said something, I tried to explain something, wasn't overthinking it, and it came across negatively to Mike. And so Mike shared this with me, and the first thing I said is like, I said, no, 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 you just misunderstood me. And I thought about this afterwards. I said, that's actually me. When I said, how do I take the lead? I said, it doesn't filter through any of those guiding principles very well. You misunderstood me is actually blaming somebody else for the misunderstanding versus, hey, you know what? I totally could have said that better. Can you give me a little bit more about how I'm impacting you right now? And what happened is when Mike started to give me more about how he was impacting me, he felt hurt. He felt like I was trying to understand him versus blaming him for misunderstanding me. It's one of the hardest things we do, but just try and change that in your life and you'll change everything. Stop telling people they misunderstand you.
The interesting dichotomy here too is like you are somewhat responsible for for how what you say lands on somebody else. If I say something and you completely misinterpret my intent, that is partially your responsibility, but it's partially mine as well, right? So by exercising take the lead or by taking ownership of that, it just helps you build awareness of how you are impacting other people. And I may say something to Kyle in the exact same way that I say something to you, and the interpretations are completely different, you know? And this is why this is why take lead is so impactful. And this is why this training is so important in our world, because whether you're a business aviation captain or you're a flight instructor or you're a first officer out in the bush, you are going to run into every single personality out there, So the last thing we want to do is just hide under the yoke and not be, aware of how you can make that positive impact in the flight deck.
And that awareness is, it's key. And that's just something I think like I lacked until I became aware, right? We don't know what we don't know. It's like if you go into imagine going to the doctor and instead of them asking you about your symptoms, they just start throwing medicine at you, different drugs at you, like
Right.
idea. Like they have to diagnose you. They have to ask you questions, understand your symptoms so that they have clarity. Once they have clarity, they can give you the drug or the medication or the exercise. And it's the same with our mentality. It's the same with our leadership. So getting clarity feels harsh because you're like I have to recognize and own that, okay, my impact landed negatively with Mike. And there's a lot of stuff that I had to work through, and I am constantly working through to shift out of my own head because I want Mike to see me as a positive role model, somebody he can trust. So what I do, I go and justify, say, hey, Mike, you just misunderstood me. It actually logically does the opposite, where Mike is now feels like, oh, I'm the stupid one because I misunderstood him. Versus that's not what we mean. So it's, hey, Mike, how do I impact you? And then just shifting from intention, right? We all have good intent. If you're flying an airplane, your intention is not to, I mean, I don't want to say it, but it's your intention is good. I
Right.
want a safe flight. That's never a challenge. But the challenge is our egos get flared up, and we focus on our intent instead of the impact that we have on the people around us, and it's a massive shift in everything you ever want when you shift that.
Let's take a quick break to tell you about a friend of the show, Timothy P. Pope. Tim is a certified financial planner who specializes in helping professional pilots chart a smarter financial course. Whether you're focused on retirement, investment management, or strategic tax planning, Tim brings the tools and insight to help you make the most of your career and beyond. He's also the host of the Pilot's Portfolio podcast, where he breaks down real-world financial strategies designed specifically for pilots. Timothy P. Pope, helping professional pilots make the most out of life.
Yeah, there's a lot of carryover with this stuff too, outside of the cockpit. Just with other people, or even your spouse. A lot of times communicating with them. But it's the funny thing about aviation is that you think about like leadership, and the first thing you think of is, like we talked about, like there's a captain, there's a first officer, there's somebody that's the leader that's in charge, and we've already discussed how that's not really the lens you want to look through it. But how many other jobs where you get paired up with a random person, and then you're trapped in this little room for like all that time for 3 days straight, or 4 days, or whatever it is. Like it's a really like accelerated kind of, hey, let's get to know each other and work together and figure out how to communicate effectively. Oh, and by the way, you're flying an airplane and taking off and landing, doing stuff that can be very dangerous and affect a lot of other people. So that's why it's so magnified in this scenario. And it's like go back 30 years ago, we didn't even talk about CRM. Like, this is one of those things that's like we're not really talking about, but we really should, because it's really important to figure this out, because we've all been in situations where it goes wrong, and it's not good.
Yeah.
And it's unsafe.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for listeners to take away from this too is that it's nobody's fault. Like we're adopting these beliefs unconsciously from a young age. Like social media, every time you guys say, leadership position, right? People hear that as leadership. It's like all these words around us are forming beliefs if we don't interrupt them. If we're not consciously taking the time to think about, hey, what do I really believe leadership is and why? Right? The moment, for the impact versus intent thing, like the moment I said, hey, you misunderstood me, that all actually stems from my belief that leadership is positional. All right. So I still have that in me. I'm learning to shift to this belief that leadership is, I fully believe it. And I'm finding validation. I'm like, I keep looking at everything, like the words that I'm using. I'm like, okay, how's that impacting that other person? Right. And what's the truth behind it? And the truth is, when I say, hey, you just misunderstood me, the truth is that other person typically is feeling like they're the ones doing it wrong. Right. It's not a very positive impact. So I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't work very well. And then going back, just to kind of give you guys an understanding of how we do this really effectively, going back to that DISC tool is one of the tools we use. Basically, the best way to describe this is everybody has attributes, or we don't have strengths and weaknesses. Oftentimes we just hear strengths and weaknesses, but throw that belief out. Just humor the idea that there's no such thing as a strength or weakness, but instead we all have attributes. We all have tendencies that we just have. What happens is, depending on the scenario, that tendency could be seen as a strength or seen as a weakness, right? So leadership is about getting over the strengths and weaknesses and realizing that, okay, in this moment, are my attributes helping or hindering? And if they're hindering, I need to ask for help. So Mike and I had opposite attributes, so we're a really good team. The challenge that we would have faced if we were flying together before we even knew any of this stuff is that because we're opposite, we have very opposing views on things, and we would have conflict, right? We'd be looking at the same two different sides of the coin, right? Or you draw the number 6 on the ground. Mike says it's a 9 and I say it's a 6. And we just spend the whole time trying to defend why I think it's a 6 and he thinks it's a 9. We just both start arguing, right? No, it's a 9. Look at it this way. And I keep looking at it like, no, dude, it's a 6, right? This disc tool helps you see the other side. And I've never seen anything more effective in helping people recognize and actually truthfully, instead of just being told, hey, we all see the world differently. This tool opens up your eyes to, oh, wow, that's how we see things differently. And then what happens is, because we're opposite, I might not understand what he means. So then I seek to understand it because I'm understanding he might be looking at it from a different angle than me. Now you have collaboration. And it's a massive shift.
I did a different personality study. This one was called the Enneagram, and it's got like 9 different personality types. Probably some similarities there. And I think all of those, in so many other careers, you see people doing personality assessments and sort of, I think there's a better awareness of the different types of personalities. Just maybe in different industries, they use a different tool, but they're all sort of like trying to find the right fits. And it is one of the things that I've thought in aviation, we never have really done anything like that. And I mean, I guess some of the major airlines have assessment
isn't that
tools,
like Hogan
but
deal that
I guess,
but
but
like that?
I mean, what if you got paired and on your pairing sheet you said you're flying with Captain Smith and he's a, INTJ or whatever, that I don't know, that, that's a different, but like, what, here's his seniority number. Why not also include something like that? Well, don't you think that would be a great head start?
You
Or
have
like,
to have PBS to make
I
that
know,
work.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I only play with this. Or like, for the Enneagram, like there's numbers 1 through 9. Like, boy, if you understand how that one works and you go, I'm flying with a number 5, then that's a huge advantage for you to be able to start that trip and sort of understand where people are coming from. So maybe.
No, but then it takes all the excitement out of it.
I guess.
Going in blind.
You're
and just being like,
you're
all
hitting
right.
the nail on the head, because that's what the disc does. So
yeah.
disc, literally, you can go in there, anybody under the umbrella of first class leaders, and so I can type in Mike's name. Mike and I are going to go flying together. It puts us side by side, and it literally tells us, here's how you guys are similar. Here's how you guys are different. Here's what to watch out for. Here's a couple of ways to, if you're trying to get buy-in, create connection, collaborate, resolve conflict, resolve tension. There's a couple of bullet points about how to do that with that person. And so, and just to be very clear, there's behavioral tools and there's personality tools. This is a behavioral tool, right? Personalities are personalities. And I don't know much about personality tests. You can have the exact same communication style. So like another way of saying behavioral style, like this is a communication style, let's call it. So another way to understand that is you can have the exact same communication style with different personalities, right? But you can find commonality in your communication style. And understanding these different communication styles, this does a really good job of making it super simple, DIS or C, and then there's kind of mixes. But that's the basic principle. And so what we're finding is just that awareness alone. Like we've had crews that were going to get fired or going to quit. They were having conflict, couldn't get along, blaming it on generational gap and all of these different excuses. They came in and one day are like, oh crap, I realized I could be a little more patient, or I realized I could do this. Because, this thing's a non-threatening tool that it shows how their attribute in that moment with that communication or behavioral style person could be misunderstood. Right. For one example, the thing that I was most misunderstood for was I would be literally called arrogant. Like this was me, guys. I was that captain 100%. And it was the saddest thing ever because I'm like, no, guys, like I don't know what to do. And I put my hand up in a CRM course when I was at the airlines and I said, how do I be humble? Completely changed my life. Everybody laughed and nobody gave me an answer there. But that really left me thinking, well, we're in CRM. They say be humble. And I asked how to be humble, and they have nobody has an idea. They
said,
right?
this is a room of pilots. Nobody's humble. Come on.
I know. But I tell you guys, like that was the start for me, because what happened is it wasn't that I wasn't humble. It was that I was misunderstood Okay, so what was I misunderstood? Well, I'm very passionate and I like to drive results. That could be misunderstood as arrogant, controlling, manipulative, XYZ. And so I could just blame everybody else and be like, yeah, well, like it or leave it. Or I could take the lead and recognize that maybe I could slow down a little bit. Maybe I could invite some more collaboration, right? Maybe I could, help people understand by asking them for their opinions more often. Because when I get passionate, I literally, drive things forward and I forget to talk to people sometimes, right? But the people that know me, I express this to them vulnerably because I need help with this. And so instead of feeling like I need to correct myself all the time, Michael just jump in and be like, hey, Kyle, you mind if I have a couple of words? I'm like, oh crap, sorry. So, it's a game changer because you don't feel like you have to do it all by yourself. So,
It takes time. It takes time, but the awareness piece is what kicks things off, And for Kyle and I specifically, it's such a great example because of how polar opposite we are. And I'll use first class leaders as a whole project as an example. Kyle often gets an idea and wants to go guns a blazing. And I'm usually the guy that's like, okay, well, hold on here a second. Like, let's look at this from this angle. Let's check things out. And um, that can often happen in the flight deck, right? Under varying circumstances. So I have to kind of be aware of the kind of person that Kyle is, or the tendencies that might follow him, but and adapt as necessary with the understanding. But again, that awareness piece is the game changer.
the ironic part, the ironic part about all of this is that the moment you do disc and you go through some exercises, that's the moment you actually believe that most things are just misunderstandings. And then
Yeah,
what happens, like, it's not about having the answers. It's about the fact is that like Mike and I still have disagreements. We still have conflicts, all of those things. But what we are more willing to do is seek to understand because we believe that, oh, they're just looking at it from a different viewpoint than me. So then we just have conversation. We'll have hours and hours of conversations around disc and our styles. And so just that framework, it's almost like a CRM framework that brings us together. It's like, hey, let's just bring it all back to like our disc styles. And then we start laughing about it because we start to recognize that, oh, you're misunderstanding, I'm passionate, and you're taking that as arrogance, and I can see how that can come. And then I'm taking when he says, whoa, 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 slow down when I'm trying to drive something forward. I used to take that as they didn't trust me. Right? Well, why don't you trust me? Like, let's go. And so I realized that wasn't it either. I make a lot of mistakes when I drive things forward. I don't think them through. So I'm like, okay, well, I could lean into Mike for that. He's more methodical and analytical. So teamwork, right?
yeah. What it's interesting too. What I've noticed when you talked about awareness, right, and kind of self awareness, it's amazing how many people that are known for being kind of a pain by the rest of the pilot group have no idea, like
Zero.
no
Yeah.
clue, dude. And
Let me ask you this, Max. What do they need more than anything?
yeah, someone to tell them.
They need not just somebody to tell them. They need a leader.
No, they do. They need a leader, and that's what it reminds me from several of these people. But there's one dude that I remember, and he was actually a good dude, and he was just like physically imposing, like a big guy, and he just was like abrupt, and the way he spoke, and it like put people right on their heels right away, right? And I remember, and I kind of like guys like that. I kind of poke at a little bit and joke around with them to try and soften them up a little bit. And I remember one time we're sitting there in cruise, and he was like he's bitching about FOs or something like that. I said, "Listen, this might be a real staggering thought for you, but just hear me out. Maybe you're the problem."
Yeah.
And he looks at me and he goes, "What?" I'm like, "Dude, like the way you come off, it freaks everybody out. Like, you got to knock it off. You got to be like, introduce yourself." Like we went through this whole thing, and he had like just no idea. Dude. He's
Yeah.
like, "Oh my God, I feel so bad now." Like and it was like a light bulb moment of just the way he was. I think just the way he was with everybody. You had no intention of being
Yeah.
off-putting or whatever, but just literally had zero self-awareness.
See,
And we've seen that, you see that a lot of times. And I think that piece too of being a leader is not just, how you can affect the people around you. It's about, turning it around.
Well, and our industry just feeds it too, because especially the guy he's been a captain for forever.
Yeah.
So he's always been in,
Has no
the quote leadership, he's never had to fly with somebody that's like got a perceived rank above him. So he's always the one calling the shots. So yeah,
he's lost the perspective of an FO because he hasn't been one in 25 years. It's just like, and it kind of snowballs with people sometimes. So it's
and that the way you impacted that person, Max, is like you took the lead, right? And the question is, so when you take the lead, it's not a perfect science, and it's an art, right? So in that moment, that worked. That could have went the other way as well, but the thing that you could be confident about is that who you want to be, right, and what you did were in alignment. You don't want to be the person that's enabling somebody else and having somebody else who's complaining and bitching, and that that's causing a lot of the energy to be sucked out. Maybe people don't want to fly with them. It's just literally a safety issue. So you had to have the courage to say something. So we work together with pilots, and because I'm not the only one coming up with solutions on how to take the lead, I just have the framework. And this is cat's out of the bag here, guys. I literally learn from all these pilots that are learning to take the lead because we're just working out these challenges, working through them. And then, like you said, well, how do you speak up to a captain like that? My question that I would be asking myself is, how do I do that to maximize the chances that they're going to become aware and like they're going to receive it positively?
Yeah. And the way, like with that dude, I remember specifically, it was the lead up to that, which was probably a day and a half of just kind of joking around with him a little bit and like, and just kind of doing it in a way that was like
building rapport,
building rapport, but also that when I said, hey, maybe you're the problem, it was 80% true, but 20% of it was kind of still in the joking way. I'm like, this is gonna be really weird. I have to make sure you're sitting down, but maybe it's you. You ever think about that? Like, and then it kind of puts people, less defensive, I think. But that was just with that specific.
One of the best ways to do that. One of the best ways, and this is basically gets into like setting boundaries, because setting boundaries is a healthy part of leadership and helping other people as well. You were basically setting a boundary there. And learning to set boundaries, there's, healthy ways to do that, effective ways to do that. So those are skills we can build. And questions of intention are often one of the best ways to, number one, figure out if the person is crossing a boundary. So I'll give you great example, almost the exact same. This bigger guy, older guy, I'll never forget it. We're going to Rome on the 767. I'm the first officer. First flight attendant comes in, says, "Hey, do you want a coffee?" I'm like, "Yeah, please. A couple of milks in mine." Captain says, "Yeah, please." He's like, "Yeah, I'll take mine with some milk." And just short, like, didn't really give much of it. And I knew that this guy was notorious. Nobody wanted to fly with him. And I was kind of the same as you. Like, I always kind of got curious about these people. Not always. I used to get reactive. And I started getting more curious. So flight attendant comes back with the coffees. Captain takes a sip of it, spits it back into the cup, gives it back to the flight attendant, says, "Not enough milk." She goes back out, puts more milk in, comes in, looks at it. He's like, "Now it's cold." Gives it back to her again. Goes out the second time, and I just turned to him and I said, I didn't understand how well I did this. I didn't understand leadership at the time. I turned to him and I said, "Are you intentionally trying to be a dick?" Okay? And it's a question of intent, and there's good ways or healthy ways to do it. But in that moment, I'm just asking him, I'm like, "Hey, are you trying to be rude? Are you trying to be sure?" And he's like, "No, why?" And I'm like, "If you were coming across that way, would you want to know about it?" And he's like, "Well, yeah." And I'm like, "I'm pretty sure she's back there crying, man." And he's like, "Oh, well, that's not what I mean. I just know how I like my coffee." I'm like, "That's great, but do you think she knows how you like your coffee?" Like, and anyways, it was crazy. So I go back, I mended it with her. She was crying. And then he's like, "Guys, I'm so sorry. Like, bought everybody dinner, bought everybody wine on the trip and stuff." Like, just completely changed. But this guy was like 60 years old. And again, nobody knew how to help him interrupt his pattern. And that's the saddest thing, guys. Like, I think about this all the time. Old Kyle, like, I had to break out of this cycle myself. Nobody knew how to lead me. So I was never getting the help. I would get snide comments and like snarky remarks, but nobody was able to create that space for me or to say the things in a way that I could perceive them. And yeah, part of that is hugely my own responsibility. While also at the same time, if the better a leader is, the more that they'd be able to inspire somebody like me when I was in that old headspace. And so the saddest thing is the most difficult people that anybody listening to this podcast, the most difficult people in your life, they need you to be the better leader. They need leadership more than anybody.
That's really well said. Yeah. And in both of the examples that you guys gave, you were the first officer. You were, and that I feel like so many of us are in the mindset, I'm in the right seat. I'm the chameleon. I'm not going to, I'm going to blend in with whatever this guy or gal wants to do. And we're just going to get through this. And so it doesn't stop the situation. And you guys both had a great example of, how you could provide some feedback in the right way to do it. And that's why I think it's so important to get this started right away, as a student pilot.
Well, I think what's interesting too is that, like I talked about before, not a lot of other jobs are you cooped up with somebody for
Right.
3 days in this small space for these long periods of time. But then the thing is, there's always the light at the end of the tunnel because you're like, dude,
Right.
I'm out of here. And
I'm never going to see this guy or gal again.
I'm just going to avoid this guy like the plague. So there's not also that long term where if it's somebody you're working with, on a
Business
project
aviation.
for
You're
6 months or business aviation where you're stuck with somebody for long term, you maybe have more motivation to put in the effort to try and work it out. Whereas the short yet intense period of an airline trip is like a lot of people are just like, oh, whatever, dude. I just got to get through this next day and I'm home and I'll forget all about this.
Like Dylan said it earlier, like, this applies to other areas of our life. And, it's interesting because most pilots that come into any of our leadership workshops, they initially think that they're coming in there to be a better leader for the cockpit. But most people don't even talk about flying. They talk about their personal lives. Because you're thinking you're stuck in the cockpit for 3 days with this person. I'm stuck in my house with my wife for the next 40 years. Right. And so if you build that habit of ignoring and avoiding when that is difficult for 3 days, it doesn't change anything. It comes home. You can't avoid, right? You can't avoid your wife. You can avoid your friends. You just get rid of them, right? It's not a fun life versus just choosing to take the lead in any of those relationships is going to massively pivot your ability to learn and grow and become less reliant on everybody else to make you happy and more reliant on, yourself to be happy so that you can lead everybody around you.
In fact, I would go as far as to say is that all the practice is done at home.
Yeah.
Because you spend, most people anyway, spend most time at home, and perhaps it's a more comfortable environment with their spouse. Sometimes it's often one of the more trickier environments to be the leader that your spouse needs. But by exercising that muscle, you go to work and it's kind of like, hey, this is familiar territory for me. I can do this here too. Especially in an airline environment where you're meeting somebody new every single pairing. Yeah,
I get so excited the more difficult the person is. And I'm not kidding. Like my dad was the most difficult person in my entire life. And the moment I decided, oh, how can I take the lead from my dad when I was 30 years old, completely changed our relationship. The stuff that he shared with me, I had no idea that he was 21. He had three kids by the time he was like 22 or 23. The bank was, he was going to like foreclose or he was going to he told me these stories about financially. And then, he's talking about like having no idea he had no idea how to be a dad. He's like, he's so, and I'm like, how can I blame him when he's so focused on trying to like survive, like make sure there's food on the table. And like, I'd never given him the opportunity to say that. And I'm pretty sure he never said that to anybody. And giving him that space and that non-judgment, he shared it all. And there was things that he talked about, he would be physically and verbally abusive to us. And he would talk through it. And then he'd be like, yeah, he's like, I know that wasn't right. But he's like, till this day, I don't know. Like, what do I do? Well, that's a great question. And then we would work through it. And he's like, oh my God, like, nobody ever, like, I had no idea how to do that. Right. I'm like, yeah, I get it. you have the authority. And when you have the authority, you tell people, you yell at your kid. And then if they submit, right, then that validates that that works. But that's just manipulation. It's not leadership. And manipulation works, but only short term.
Max, what I'm hearing is that Kyle and Mike are going to fix your relationship with your dad, your wife, your kids, and the asshole captain you fly with in their 29-minute webinar. You can take on your lunch break. It's very quick.
And all you have to do is show up with a $10 bill.
That's right. That's right. But seriously, fellas, let's say this resonates with somebody. We could talk about this for, I think there's many episodes that we could probably approach on different topics, but let's say this resonates with the listener. And maybe at first you thought, oh, this leadership thing is just for a flight department manager or a captain. But, I think it's pretty obvious that we could all benefit from this training. Let's say first, if the department manager is listening, maybe I've got a couple pilots that work for me. Maybe there's 3 or 4 of us on a business jet. Is this something that you say, hey, bring the whole department in together? Let's do a webinar all online together, or let's start with one person and then sort of do it individually? Or what's the next step for somebody that's listening to this that goes, yes, I need some of this?
Yeah, I mean, the most effective way to do this is all together, right? Because when you put a bunch of people who work together in a room and you give them this tool and the framework, the take lead framework and the DISC tool, we're all the smartest people for ourselves. I don't know how to fix you, Dylan, or fix you, Matt. I don't know how to. That's not the job. The job for me is fix. Yeah, it's not. It's not about fixing you, right? It's about seeking to understand you. And the more I learn to understand you and the way that you guys think, the beliefs, that, number one, is going to teach me stuff, right? I'm going to learn how somebody else thinks. I don't have to agree with it. That's not the point. The point is to collect as much information as we can so that we can and respond the best way that we can, right? So put everybody into the same room, give them disc. You start to look at these challenges that a team faces, like real CRM challenges. We bring those in, and it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a flight department. We work with anybody who is a team that wants to work better together. You bring them together. You take real challenges. You filter them through these lenses. You reframe how you're looking at these challenges based on the tool, and it's a game changer. Changes everything.
In our experience too, guys, I mean, think about this. You're in a flight department with a couple of other pilots. You all come into this one-day workshop, and it's kind of like, okay, Max has a problem with Dylan, and Dylan's on the call, so I can't share my stories openly because, it's going to just create more turmoil and all this stuff going on. But what we've been very successful at is whoever's facilitating does a very good job of being super vulnerable up front. I have no problem sharing my stories with whoever I've had troubles with, or, Kyle sharing stories about his dad. We create that psychological safety right out of the gate. So there is comfort and there is the ability to share these stories openly. And we make sure people are aware that this isn't about, being right or being better or being wrong or being less than. It's not about that. It's about seeking to understand. And it's about when we have that shared understanding, we can all be better here as a team. So yeah, we've seen success with pilots coming in individually or just one individual crew coming in. But, if we had our ultimate choice, the entire flight department coming in at one time, and think about that too, right? Like you're sharing stories, people are finding, I guess, shared understanding at the same time. Everyone is hearing it from the horse's mouth at one time. Just creates a ton of impact going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You basically
That
have,
makes sense.
right? People will look at conflict as a negative thing, but conflict is just a difference in understanding and opinion. And if you didn't have conflict, you'd never grow. If we never had conflict as humans, we'd all think the same and we'd all do the same. So it makes no sense. So conflict's not the problem, it's how we handle it. And that's what happens. So when you have 2 pilots who don't get along and then they come into the workshop together, the biggest misnomer is that they don't want to talk to each other, and that's fine. They actually don't need to, because they'll talk about other situations that uncovers the exact same thing. Right? The reason that they're conflicting is because they're not seeking to understand each other. So whether they talk about that together or whether they talk about, oh, well, yeah, my wife, she doesn't understand me, right? It's going to be the exact same things that they realize. And when they bring the tool in, that gives it context And if you don't have context, right, then it's very difficult to understand how to fix these problems or these challenges. I don't like to call them problems. They're challenges. They're opportunities to get better. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I could have really used this training, Dylan, at a certain flight department back in the day. Do you remember this? With
Yes. I was
Imagine,
actually
dude.
picturing.
I flew. We had this one with this dude. It was like, how old was he at the time? Like
70s.
70
Yeah.
something,
Oh,
like
wow.
Air Force B-52 pilot, like
oh geez.
just the worst, dude. This guy. And then there was me.
No, Max, he wasn't the worst. You guys just didn't understand each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
And
weren't
then there was
communicating.
me. I was like the young kid.
Yeah.
And then this other like middle-aged, who's like the easiest going, nicest guy. It was
Yeah.
the weirdest dynamic. I would have, God, if
That would have been a
I
great
paid
reality
my
show.
money to
Yeah.
go back in time and just like
Oh yeah.
be able to record that.
Yeah.
It would have
Oh
been
my
incredible.
gosh.
And
It's
To
go ahead.
clarify one major thing too, just because it's, I say, seeking to understand people is a solution. It doesn't mean that, boundaries shouldn't be set at certain times and like, you're flying with the 7 year, like, yeah, if people don't want help, the other hard thing about leadership is that if people don't want help, you can't help them.
Yeah.
Right. But you're
Yeah.
trying to find different ways to inspire them. Right. So I look at it like being a lighthouse instead of a tugboat. You don't want to be the tugboat. And most of us, if we really look at it, I know I was a big time tugboat. I'm less of a tugboat, more of a lighthouse. And that shift as I learn the skill of being a lighthouse, man, it is so much less stressful, right? I'm not trying to manipulate, not trying to control. A tugboat can only do, push and pull one ship at a time. A lighthouse can inspire millions, right? But what the lighthouse has to really get good at is, okay, that boat doesn't want to follow my light. Okay, oh well, all right, next, right? Like help the people that want help. So it's yeah, it's a constant art between them all, and it's not an easy fix. What we want to make sure that we plant, the seed that we're planting into the world, is that anybody can learn to lead, and you really don't want to wait till you're in the left seat. You're way more at jeopardy when you're in the left seat. Think about it. When you're a student pilot, and you try to lead your instructor, so much less jeopardy. So much less jeopardy, right? You're the student. You're the one
Yeah.
paying, right? It's actually when you're a captain and you haven't practiced any of these skills, the jeopardy is huge because nobody's going to speak up to you. You're not going to get that
Mhm.
back, right? People are just be like, yeah, well, you're the boss, whatever, figure it out. And that's tough. So it's yeah, just looking at it that lens is it's a massive change. Focus on your impact. Stop focusing on your intentions. You can explain those later, but first focus on your impact.
It really, when we had our first conversation, Kyle, I reflected on, I'll never forget, there was a captain that I flew with at the Commuters, and he embodied a lot of what we're talking about. And the word that really resonated with me is inspire.
Mhm.
And he just inspired our crew to be the best that we could be. And not because he told us to do it. It was just the way he was made you want to be the best version of yourself. And those trips are the most fun to fly. They're the best. They're the most enjoyable when everybody's on the same page and everyone is inspired. And I've always reflected on that captain and tried to be that person and think about how I can be more like that. So it sounds like the program that Kyle and Mike have put together is a great foundation. And look, I was joking earlier when I said in 30 minutes you're going to fix the problem. It sounds like it's really, you can supply the tools.
Yeah.
You got to go out there and build the muscle and do the reps. And, it's just like anything else. You can't read about an ILS approach and then think you're going to be able to shoot it. It takes practice. You're going to have to do it multiple times. And
What a metaphor.
Yeah, incredible.
Nice job.
Fellas, we're excited for this training and these tools to be made available to professional pilots. Like we said, there's not a lot of this out there right now. We'll have a link to First Class Leaders in the show notes, and folks will be able to get in touch with you there and look at next steps. But anything you guys would like to mention in closing before we wrap up?
I'd say whatever stage of your career you're at, think about the impact that leadership, like learning the stuff that we're talking about, think about the impact that I have on those stages. People go and spend thousands of dollars on interview prep, which is ridiculous. And I get why they do it. versus spending the money on yourself to learn how to be a leader. So you go into an interview and you're just authentic, because interview prep just teaches you how to be inauthentic in an interview. It says, okay, if they say this, I'm generalizing. I'm saying there's probably good interview prep out there. The stuff that I took and some of the stuff that I've looked at, it's, hey, when they say this, say this. Leadership, when you work through it as a student or at any stage, but especially when you're a student, like when do you need leadership the most, right? When you're broke, when you're pressured, when you're stressed. And what do they want in an interview? They want to see somebody who's broke, pressured, and stressed, right? Show up as the best version of themselves. Show up as a leader. And so when you go into that interview, like you can't fake this stuff. You have to understand how to talk through this. My last interview is when I took a private job after the airlines. They asked me one question. I gave him an answer. He's like, holy, I've never thought about it that way. I said, well, I don't blame you. Nobody taught us. And then we talked about leadership for the next hour, and I got hired on the spot. And then I got asked to build this training for their company, right? So it's powerful when you understand these concepts, but you don't understand them by reading a book. You understand maybe the concept, but you don't really understand it and how to apply it until you start to practice leadership. Take the lead. So
I just want to add one thing too. When we think about leadership in our life, if the focus here is to show up as the best version of yourself, if you just think about that statement right there, if you're not showing up as the best version of yourself, what is that costing you? Is it cost? It's likely costing you your happiness of some degree, maybe joy, maybe a closer relationship that you're desiring with your spouse. Maybe it's that conflict in the flight deck. Maybe it's your job, because you can't seem to get along with your flying partner. So when you think about the importance behind what it means to be a leader, and whether it's too early to be thinking about leadership training in your career, ask yourself, what is this costing me if I don't start this now?
That's a good point. I have one more question for you guys that's a little bit unrelated, but most of the time when we talk to like Canadian pilots, they always did something cool and like flew like a caribou to diamond mines in the Northwest Territories or something. Did you guys do anything cool like that when you were coming up?
The boringest career ever. Did you?
The best I did was fire patrols up in the north, just flying around looking for bushfires. That's But no, and then I did air ambulance after that up into a lot of the native reserves that are isolated, but nothing too wild, I guess. I mean, it depends on your idea of wild, but I thought the wild stuff in the reserves. But
it's just, vast territory that's relatively uninhabited. So I think it always comes with some interesting like flying jobs of people.
Lots of guys up like way up north, like up in the airport.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I mean. Like
some
way
of the
up
stuff
there
that they do and see is wild.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing cool.
Well, we're in Scottsdale, so we don't have to. We don't think about any of that kind of stuff. That's why we have to live vicariously through you guys.
Close to the area of magnetic unreliability here, so that's
that's hilarious.
All right. Well, Kyle and Mike, we certainly appreciate your time today. First Class Leaders is the name of the company. The link will be in the show notes. It's time to get into it. Max, should we go together? Would that be good as podcast hosts, do you think?
Perhaps.
I don't know.
Brother-in-laws and podcast hosts is a lot. It's a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you can video that one to release as a reality show, too. I don't know. We'll just, if you have a 75-year-old old B-52 commander to throw him in as a third, that'd be good. All right, fellas, we appreciate your time.
Good talk. Thanks, guys.
Talk to you soon.
Take care.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.